Greetings, traveler. Settle by the hearth and let me tell ye a tale of magical miscreants, grim tidings, and one very powerful ape. It's called Oops, All Necromancers.
Welcome to the table, everybody. I am your great and powerful Dungeon Master, Oz, and this is the inaugural episode of Oops, All Necromancers.
Yay!
In this episode, we're going to introduce ourselves, lay out what the world is like, describe our player characters, and lay out some of the themes and content you can expect from us. So to start things off, let's go around the table and introduce ourselves before we get into the setting. Let's start with Bug.
Hi, I'm Bug. I use they, them pronouns, and this is kind of one of my first dives into D&D. I listen to a lot of D&D podcasts, though, so I'm really excited to play and explore the world. I think it'll be really fun.
Hell yeah.
Get into
Next
some bullshit.
is C.
Hi, I am C. I use they, them pronouns. I used to play D&D and a little bit of Pathfinder in high school. But back then I really didn't have the chance to kind of immerse myself in it and get really into the RP aspects of things. So with this podcast, I'm really looking forward to exploring the characters, really trying to get into it and immerse myself into everything.
For sure. And finally, Bree.
Hey, I'm Bree. I clawed my way from the void to be here. I have a pretty fair amount of tabletop gaming experience. Oz and I have both played first edition Pathfinder for quite some time. We have some experience with 5th Ed D&D and some experience with a few other tabletop role-playing games like the Iron Kingdoms RPG and things like that. Tabletop games are wonderful and fun and cool, and I'm very, very excited to enter the world that Oz has crafted for us and to get into some bullshit and also introduce some fresh new players into the wonder that is D&D.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. So let's get into it.
Hold on a minute. I forgot that I have a little shtick I want to put in here before we get into the world building of the episode. I am going to be doing the editing and the sound design for the podcast. And so as we get into the world building of this, I kind of wanted to lay the scene, make a little bit of an environment for us.
Of course. Go ahead.
Ooh.
So right here, I'm going to bring in a little bit of nature sounds. We'll make a little ASMR, make some little nature sounds, maybe some crickets maybe. And here, right here, I'm going to start a little fire. It's a little campfire for us to sit around and speak our tales over. And we can proceed with the world building.
So let's go ahead and start with a little bit about the world we'll be telling our story in. It is called Tethmir, and what's the best way to go about this? Maybe start large and work our way in. Go from just sort of the basis of the planar system worlds kind of deal and work towards you guys. So the three main sort of celestial forces, or I guess infernal or general deity level powers, are the gods, which are sort of rarely contacted. They're distant and aloof. They don't really manifest on Tethmir anymore, and worship of them is, I would say, more common than the other entities we'll speak about, other than one. But it's not a thing of like your typical fantasy of where you you're a cleric of this god and you talk to this god or their representatives and they guide you on what to do. It's just like, oh, hey, that's the god of war. Maybe say a blessing for this god of war is just like a traditional thing. Because it's, like I said, they're not really in contact with people anymore. And as far as like a manifestation showing up on Tethmir is almost unheard of at this point, with degradation of historical records and stuff. I think we'll maybe hear about them in name, but they won't really come up as a big thing. And it hasn't really played into your guys' characters, because obviously we've done some sort of back and forth about building them as characters. But they are one of the 3 main celestial forces kind of deal. The other are the Dukes of Infernus, which, if any of the listeners are familiar with, well, the Dukes of Hell from just 5th edition Pathfinder, they are similar. I have pared it down to 6 of them, and they are a bit more active in that, like, it's super easy to gain power as a warlock, right? In comparison to being a wizard or that sort of thing, where it's just like, yeah, I just make a cool contract and then I can shoot fire from my ass or whatever, right? So they are...
Sign your name in my book.
They are a sort of main force behind the city of Helvetir, which will be one of our focuses in the story, and I'll get to that in a little bit, and that they have actual physical representatives on Tethmir who are doing some, like, nation-changing, if not world-changing shit, and that they kind of control the city of Helvetir, which is like this massive city-state, right? And then the final sort of power in this triumvirate or whatever is the Endless Spiral, which is not only a god, but also kind of a law of nature in a plane. It is sort of your analog to the astral plane, and that it is where you go when you die if you're not already sworn to one of these gods or one of the dukes, is you go to the spiral, and then your soul or astral form or whatever travels along the spiral and then is reincarnated either as a higher being or whatever, or lesser being, that kind of deal. It's kind of reincarnation, but this is sort of the basis of the world working. I mean, if the Endless Spiral were gone or whatever, people would just die, and then if they're not sworn to a god, well, they're gone.
Yeah.
And then...
Is it kind of like a roll of the dice kind of thing?
Yeah.
It is not sort of a thing where the Endless Spiral is like a dude who judges you. Like, we don't have any sort of god of the underworld, Anubis type thing going on. It's just sort of an entity, and like there are or were clerics to it, because like your life clerics and your death clerics would worship this because, well, it is the fundamental force of the world and the planar system as a whole that moves you about. But you could end up going from like, I don't know, like a king who rules over an entire empire and then resurrecting as like an ant. There is a lot of ways in which the Endless Spiral comes into play, and then that it doesn't. Like, ghosts are still a thing and what have you, but it all depends on, well, a lot of factors, Yeah. But those are sort of the celestial entities. As far as the world itself, we'll go planar system first. So the planar system is pretty similar to like base 5e, and that you have your planes of air, fire, water, earth, whatever. So those still exist. I have sort of taken a more personal spin on both the Feywilds, or like a Fey realm, or the First World, if you're familiar with Pathfinder's Golarion, that kind of thing, which I refer to as the Feyan. It's just sort of a realm that, like the First World from Pathfinder, was sort of a copy of Tethmir when it was pure, i.e. there wasn't really the interaction of civilization on it, or the effects of civilized peoples doing things or whatever, but has just sort of diverged extremely in the way that nature has been allowed to take its course. And of course there's some weird time bullshit where time passes quicker in the Feyan or slower, that kind of deal. But essentially it's like the Feywilds.
Sick.
So yeah, we have the Feyan, and then we have its sort of dark sibling, essentially the Shadowfell from base, like sort of 5e stuff, if you're familiar with that, called the Shadowheim, which is a sort of murky realm where the forces of darkness, both literal and figurative, rule. The gods have their own realms, which, once again, if we get to them, we'll discuss those a bit more. Maybe as future content, we'll talk a bit more about the gods and their realms. And the dukes share the multi-layered realm of Infernus, which is, once again, fairly similar to the base, like, sort of hells. But I've pared it down a little bit just because less devils to remember. And then the Endless Spiral is sort of a realm of its own. Like I said, it's sort of your analog for the astral plane, that kind of thing.
I had a bit of a question about the some stuff we had talked about about the dimensions and stuff. We had mentioned that there's like kind of places that certain ones overlap. Is that still the case?
Yeah, so it is a thing of, there was, we'll say, an event about 13 years, 14 years before the setting of where we'll be starting the game, that has caused the planar boundaries to sort of weaken. And so that's obviously been, like a big boon for anyone who's dealing with Infernus, because, it's easier to contact devils, from Infernus and stuff like that, but it has also caused sort of a overlapping of, like in Nithraxil, which is one of the other countries that we'll get to in just a moment here. It sort of overlaps with the Shadowheim, right? So we have, entities from Nithraxil, whether it's a good old-fashioned vampire or like just an eldritch horror, sort of crossing into this realm, and the overlapping of the planes and intersecting has been becoming a bit more frequent, which is definitely going to play a bit more into the story later on. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That is something that I had forgot to mention.
Sorry, are we talking like loaf of bread planar arrangement?
I don't know that I follow. Do you mean like a sandwich?
Yeah, but like loaf of bread turned on its side, like there's all the different slices all smooched together, like the.
So like a sandwich.
Yes, is our planar system is our planar system a
So it'd
sandwich?
be more like a sandwich. Yeah. It's sure you can say a sandwich, but also the meat and cheese are clipping through each other and just doing that sort of juddery thing.
Oh, delicious.
Sure, you could say that.
Okay.
A
Yummy.
sandwich, but it's kind of like glitching out.
It's a real fucked up sandwich. It's a real messed up deal.
Delicious.
But anyway, to get back from that tangent, the setting as a whole is fairly similar to the Victorian era. So our level of technology is like gas lamps and steam power, but it is more based around Magitech and just in general, like I mentioned with Helveteer, they have a lot of intersection with the denizens of Infernus. So it might be that your gas lamps are powered by Hellflame or whatever. So yes, unfortunately, this is a vaguely steampunk podcast. I am sorry, and so are you, but that's okay. It's a cool design aesthetic sometimes. But yeah, it is more due to the fact of this world having sort of standardized schools of magic. Your wizard is no longer learning from a different wizard who lives in a tower, who has his specific tome or her specific tome or their specific tome. It is literally like, oh yeah, I'm going to Magic 101. I learned Prestidigitation the other day. And as such, wizards, artificers, warlocks, that sort of thing are far more prevalent. It's kind of a high magic setting, which is just a personal preference for me. And it's sort of more fun to play around in, right? Because like I love a sword and sorcery story, but there's not a lot of substance to it. You know, it's not good radio.
I like having spicy magic fingers.
Yeah.
Right. And plus, then you guys can do cool shit with magic, and I can go, I guess, and throw my hands up in the air. So, yeah, that's that's a general overview of the setting. As far as countries and that sort of thing, I think most of our focus will probably be on the city-state of Helvetir, which is like this massive, not quite mega city, but think like Waterdeep, if you're familiar with that, or Cheliax is probably a closer analog.
For those of us not familiar with any kind of fantasy, like like Chicago, maybe, or is that?
Chicago is not a massive ringed city-state.
Well, I know,
Not
but
yet,
like
anyway.
But
maybe the size
I don't think
of
it's
it?
Chicago level size. Maybe
Okay.
think like 1900s New York.
Okay,
or London.
Okay,
London
okay.
is a better example, and that it has just sort of grown and grown. And that's kind of the idea here, is that it started maybe with just the central part of this city, which is like the Abyss and Spire or whatever, and then as it has grown, much like cities used to and kind of thing, is that it started with this central sort of keep and then spread outwards, but this is on a grander scale.
Yeah.
It is a thing where there are millions of people living in this massive city where it's like, oh yeah, it's like half a day's travel across the city.
Okay.
That kind of level.
Gotcha.
And then the city-state of Helvetir is both the city of Helvetir and then the surrounding lands where it's like farmlands, and they might have smaller villages, but anybody who's going to be anybody is going to be in the city of Helvetir. I mean, it has complete control over this area. And the sort of reason for the power of Helvetir and how it's grown so large is that the ruling council, which is made up of 6 members that coincide with the dukes of Infernus, including the Archduke Asmodeus, are essentially direct representatives of these dukes of hell, or dukes of Infernus. And so with the power gain from that, whether it's having servants of like imps and various other larger devils, or just generally having that sort of literally the forces of Infernus behind you, they've been able to grow this city and keep complete control over it through extensive spy networks and stuff. So we're going to start in Helvetir, and then another major power player in the world of Tethmir is the country of Nithraxil, which borders Helvetir to the north, and they have sort of a massive rivalry. But like I said, because we're sort of doing this arcane arms race, neither of them will directly try and take over the other because it's mutually assured destruction. And Nithraxil is more sort of wild than the lands of Helvetir, because like I said, with Helvetir, you know, they have this entire area like under control. It is directly controlled by the dukes, who then have their direct inferiors keeping an eye on everything, you know, down to the barman in a tiny little town that's on the border of Helvetir. They know what's going on. They know the gossip in that bar, that kind of thing. Nithraxil is more of a almost quite literally old blood sort of place, where like you might have this vampire in a keep here and he controls these lands, but then he reports to someone, or at least he isn't trying to kill his neighbor.
Yeah.
So it is very much a almost direct correspondence to like the Shadowheim, and that it's like, you know, your vampires, your werewolves, your Frankenstein's monsters, they're from Nithraxil. They're from the cold north. It's more of a gothic horror-esque feel compared to the more sort of like grim city living Victorian bullshit of, you know, your neighbor's dying, but whatever, I'm going to go work in the factory for 12 hours kind of thing.
Is there like an element of like when you talk about like the cold north, I think a lot about like Russia, and like historically with wars and stuff there, like it's been hard for people to wage war on Russia because it's so damn cold and so like there's so
it's so huge,
so wild. Is that kind of like the
absolutely.
element? Like it'd be hard to get an army in because not only are they dealing with the army of Nithraxil, but also like fucking werewolves coming in and
Right, yeah.
And like
okay.
a bog you're just gonna get lost in forever.
yeah.
Right, and because of a lot of the power is, I guess, decentralized, and that I mentioned, like, you know, this vampire count up in this keep, or, you know, this necromancer or council of necromancers up in this mountain or whatever, it's a lot harder to take it because they don't really have to fight you. Like, sure, there's an Athraxi army and that sort of thing, but the place is just tough. Like,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, yeah, we can go through these woods, but also the woods are going to try to kill us. The water's probably poisoned. There's a cult of werewolves. There's at least 7 different witches in these massive woods. Like, it's going to be a bad time. So that's definitely a thing, and that there is both the benefit of their military, which, you know, they're used to their homeland. They grew up here, but there is also the thing of it just really sucks to try and invade.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, Nithraxil is literally your movie monster land, your gothic horror land, your Bloodborne-esque place. We will for sure be going there in the story, which is not to say that, of course, I'm going to be railroading you guys, but it is just because of its importance in this world, you probably will end up going there. Don't you cough at me about railroading. I don't railroad my players. Unless you guys want to stand around for 7 hours trying to shop, in which case I will cause something to happen to make you do something, dear God.
But inventory management.
Yeah, well, we can do that either off camera or something. You got to be quicker about it. Anyway, yeah, we'll touch on a bit of the other lands, and then we can go ahead and jump into characters. Just real quick, to the west of Helvetir, where we're starting, is a place called Thilmeric's Expanse. It is named for essentially the deity of nature. It is a massive forest that goes all the way to the coasts of this continent. It is a place where nature itself has an almost vested interest in the daily goings-on. Helvetir has definitely tried to encroach upon these forests, and the trees have fought back, quite literally. Like some Lord of the Rings Two Towers bullshit. Someone decided to set up an Isengard, and the trees fought back, and there is no longer an Isengard, and they want to keep it that way. But yeah, that is a place where potentially we'll go, potentially we won't. It is all up to where you guys sort of direct things, because, you know, D&D is a collaborative storytelling effort. And then to the east is a place known as the Alab Wastes, which is just sort of a chaotic desert where there was some sort of world-shaking magical cataclysm thousands and thousands of years ago that just sort of blasted the land into this sort of irradiated hellscape that just sort of, it warps the inhabitants there, it warps the travelers through it. I definitely didn't get major inspiration from Warhammer Fantasy Battle and its Chaos Waste. Don't at me. And then another 2 sort of large areas are 2 known roving dwarven mountains, in which it is a sort of mega city idea, kind of like Helvetir, which is predominantly dwarves within these mountains that actually move around the world. One is Kazakh Alt, which is sort of a floating mountain, and then the other is Kozak Kili, which is a massive floating mountain fortress on the sea that just sort of roams the seas, or maybe they direct it. Unsure on that one.
Sea dwarf.
This is like the sickest shit.
Thank you. Once again, I'm sure there's specific influences that are coming out to people. Don't at me. I know what those influences are. Yes, that's what they are. Yes, my dwarves are different. It's fine. So yeah, that is the basis of the world of Tethmir. I will call out right now that there was a specific resource I used for both designing the world as a whole and sort of getting the feel called the Grim Hollow Campaign Guide. It is by, I think it is Ghostfire Games. They have a lot of neat weapons, feats, rules, spells, that sort of thing, which have helped me sort of sort this. I don't think we'll get into a lot of what is in this campaign guide at first as far as items, but that is just because it would kill you, which is great for me, but bad for the listeners and for you because then your characters are dead and it's bad audio. But they have a bunch of different rules for as far as like taking mortal wounds and stuff like that we'll definitely be looking at because I think that makes a more engaging story. You know, it's great to have your hero who never gets harmed and you never have to worry about their death and they're doing great, wonderful, epic things, you know, whatever, saving the universe. That's cool. I think it's also fun to explore how, if you put an actual person into a fantasy setting, how that would go as far as like injuries and shit. You're not going to come out of that smelling like daisies, right?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of reflective too of how we've talked about our characters, and maybe this will help us segue into it, that like the characters we're building are very much meant to be
Flawed.
people. They're flawed and
Hugely in some cases.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like that. I don't like playing perfect characters.
It's just, I don't know. I've done it before. I've definitely done my power fantasy Mary Sue, Gary Stu, super powered character who's unharmable and they're great and everyone loves them and that can be fun. But also I played a dumb little shit wizard who tried to turn a kobold into a fireball by worshipping Tiamat. So, on that note, let's go ahead and get into your guys' characters, since I have probably talked the listener's ear off at this point about my setting because I'm very proud of it. So let's go ahead and start with you, Bree. Why don't you tell us a bit about your character?
Yeah, will do. So I am very excited to introduce my character. I am playing Sorrin Dahl. I'm a level 1 hobgoblin wizard.
Wink.
Oink.
Wink.
We are functionally using the wizard class, but flavoring it pretty heavily, which will be made more apparent as the story progresses. I used the alternate sort of heritage rules from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, so I'm starting with a different ability scores than a hobgoblin would normally have, and I also chose the observant feat, so I'm pretty excited about that. And I also selected the inheritor background, which I'm very, very excited about. It is thematically so cool and gives not only Oz a bunch of cool stuff to work with, but also I feel like is going to be really fun for me to kind of play around with. So as far as description, Sorrin is in his early 30s, looks like someone who probably used to be pretty fucking ripped like 10 years ago.
Would the term dad bod be accurate?
No, not quite.
Okay.
Well, now we can put it in the hashtag, so that's all we needed.
You're welcome.
Hashtag dad bod.
Please, the hashtag is daddy. Thank you. Continue.
Cutting
that can be cut. It's fine.
Pretty typical hobgoblin sort of vibe, at least from the 5th edition stuff where they made them handsome, because why wouldn't I? So definitely has red skin, sort of like this yellow amber colored eyes, shoulder length black hair, and like slightly oversized canines, since I couldn't decide if I liked them better on the top or the bottom. It's whatever you want. Maybe both. He presents himself very, very neatly, like almost not quite obsessively neatly. And he wears like very well kept but often mended clothes, probably mostly wool in gray and black. He has a pair of reading glasses on a chain around his neck, those little circle ones. And embroidered on his waistcoat is a heavily laden set of scales to denote his employ under the darkness of Mammon.
So a quick note on that, use the term darkness mammon. Do you want to explain what that is, or do you want me to explain?
You're the world creator. I'll leave it to you.
Okay. So the darknesses are these representatives of the Dukes of Infernus, and specifically the darkness Mammon is the representative of Mammon, who is the Duke of Trade. So that's why it's the scales for the symbol. But yeah, from here on out, at any point in the story when you hear darkness blank, it is not referring directly to that Duke. It is referring to their representative of the Council of the Six that rule Helvetir. So there's like the Darkness Mammon. The only difference in this trend is that the darkness for Asmodeus, the Archduke of Infernus, is referred to as the Abyssin. So anytime you hear that in reference to a location like the Abyssin Spire or what have you, that is referring to the actual ruler of Helvetir. So, anyway, continue.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Thanks for the little aside. Makes a lot more sense now. He is currently situated in the city of Helvetir, basically as a low-level lackey accountant under the Darkness Mammon. Sorrin is tense, is probably the best way to describe him. He holds himself with, such good posture that it looks uncomfortable. Like, when he walks, when he moves, he does things with, intent and focus, but also as if he is ready to start running in the opposite direction in an instant. He was born and spent his childhood and most of his early adult life in a relatively small hamlet in the countryside of Nithraxel, so not a huge place. So his current position in the city is not comfortable. I don't know. I think that pretty much covers it.
Yeah.
Sweaty man scared of everything.
Sweaty not wizard. Got it.
So what he's doing here and what's going on is we'll get into that later. Yeah, I think that about wraps everything up.
Yeah, for sure.
That's Sorrin for you.
Let's see. C. Go ahead and go next.
Yeah, so I am going to be playing Madame L, who is a half-elf and a spiritualist, a medium, and a holder of seances.
Fancy.
Functionally, what that means is, she's a bard, and I'm going to be choosing the Spiritualist Bard College as we progress. I get to choose that at level 3.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I am basing this off the Spiritualist Unearthed Arcana, but probably by the time that this episode comes out, Spiritualist will probably be published in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Mm-hmm. So at the beginning of the campaign, I will be basing it off the Unearthed Arcana, but slowly I will probably be kind of transitioning it into the published material.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the Spiritualist in the Unearthed Arcana is pretty cool. It's kind of like a chaos bard, I guess.
Yeah, it really is. Kind of like they just recently put it out in Tasha's guide, but there's a wild magic barbarian that gets a similar thing where for your inspiration, in comparison to their rage, you roll randomly and receive a benefit. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
Which is flavored as a ghost or specter or whatever showing up and telling a story, which is wildly funny to think of a bard just being like, oh, yeah, come on, tell me a story to pump us up.
I really like that, though. I really liked that this is kind of different than a typical bard. Mm-hmm. So, a typical bard, usually you think of them as playing a song to encourage their allies, or playing a drum, or putting on
or
some kind of musical performance.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Being an unspeakably horny little bastard is usually how it goes.
We don't do that here.
But yeah, I like that this is kind of different, and it really adds a lot of flavor to it, which is kind of what I'm here for.
Spooky flavor.
I
Do
love
anything for the flavor.
Yeah, that's I think there's a lot of untapped potential with the bard as far as what people are willing to play, because, like you said, you kind of have this view of bards as, oh, they have a lute and they play a song and they're horny and they probably have a feather in their hat, and also
Though
they're good at everything.
I do
'cause
have
they're
a feather
bard.
in my hat, just so
Well,
everyone is absolutely
you couldn't escape
clear.
that one.
There's just gotta be powerful hats. There simply must be.
Yeah, it's Victorian era stuff.
I'll get into that right now, actually, as far as her description and such go. If you were to see Madame L about town, you would see her moving about from place to place in lavish finery, oftentimes with big, extravagant hats with feathers in them and veils covering her face. But if you were to see under those veils, you would know that she was a half-elf who appears to be in her late 20s, but for a half-elf that is around 50 years old. And she has long, braided auburn hair, done up in the most recent fashion, of course. If you were highborn, you would know that Madame L can be found at most balls or formal dinners. She is a sought-after guest because she will speak of her spiritualist exploits, and it's kind of during a time period where the aristocrats are very enamored with spiritualism, kind of like the spiritualist movement that we experienced back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Other than being found at balls or dinners, she is known to be found at the Green Fairy, which is a absinthe bar. It's very hip right now.
All the rage.
To get absolutely fucking trashoed.
Hey, listen, in 10 years, we're going to discover laudanum and shit's going to pop off.
Oh no!
Other than that, not much is really known about Madame L, or her family, where she's from, her lineage.
I can see why she would definitely be invited to these types of places, because if her origins and her family are a mystery, she's got this whole air of intrigue, and she just shows up on the scene,
and
everybody's like,
she definitely leans into that as somebody who is probably making a lot of money off of her spiritualist endeavors and her seances and contacting people's dearly beloved. She stands to gain a lot by portraying herself as this intriguing, mysterious character. Yeah.
Marketing. Does she come off as unapproachable?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very clear that she is a highborn aristocrat type person. She will not typically associate with beggars, for example, or
Accountants.
probably not accountants. No. She kind of looks down her nose at anyone who doesn't immediately appear as a highborn or doesn't appear well off, or very clearly she has lots of prejudices.
So based on all this interacting with high society, that kind of thing, you took the noble background, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So some interplay with your family will definitely be coming up at some point, I'm sure. And we'll learn a bit more about Madame L, who she is as a person, and also whether she's actually a spiritualist or not. Cool. So, Bug, why don't you tell us about your character?
Yes. So I am playing Finnegan, or Finny for short. He's a 13-year-old satyr druid, and I gave him the urchin background. Later on, as I level up, I'm going to eventually do a circle of spores.
We got
for
a little
Finny.
rapscallion on our hands, huh?
And so Finny's kind of, I mean, I guess kind of a just basic druid, you know? I like druids. They're cool. They're fun.
Cool.
So Finny goes by he, him pronouns, but also will go by any other pronoun and doesn't really think about gender because, I mean, you'll find out why, but his upbringing, it doesn't matter. Like,
Yeah, he's a young boy trying to survive in a mega city that desperately wants to kill everyone. So
exactly.
not that he wants to kill everyone, but the city itself is not exactly hospitable to anyone.
But so Finny has like shaggy, kind of curly black hair that goes a little past his ears. Speaking of his ears, he does have big old goat ears. And he has like medium olive tone skin and big old gray ram horns. And he has black furry goat legs and those golden goat eyes with the sideways pupils.
How good!
He wears an old, torn up, like white Victorian children's blouse and a dirty green tartan kilt. And around his neck, he wears a green stone necklace on a golden chain. And around Helvetir, people think that he is a tiefling because satyrs are just not really prominent.
Yeah, satyrs are not super common in the area, like maybe further west, closer to Thilmiric's Expanse, because it's more of a natural place. They would be like, oh, you're a satyr, compared to Helvetir, where it's like, oh yeah, tieflings are kind of a dime a dozen. Like, you're dealing with hell forces all the time. You just get tieflings. It just happens sometimes. So they're like, man, that's one unfortunate tiefling because they didn't get the cool red skin or a forked tongue or anything like that. But also they're kind of blessed, so that's cool.
Yeah, and Finny doesn't know he's a satyr, but he also doesn't think he's a tiefling either. He just doesn't really. He's very confused. Very confused. And when he was around like 3 years old, came into this world from the Faen. Doesn't know how, and so that's why he doesn't know really what a satyr even is.
Right, and that's also where his necklace comes from, right? Is that he basically, he was a baby who got dropped out of a portal with a necklace and was lucky enough to not get torn apart by wolves or whatever.
Pretty much, yeah.
You know, those city wolves.
You know them city wolves. Well, he wasn't dropped off in the city, or else he'd probably be in a military base somewhere, but...
Yeah. And another very important thing about Finny is he has a undead rat friend named Wallace.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Wallace is his brother, correct?
Yes. They're brothers.
In an adoptive way, but, well, no, they... No, actual, real blood brothers. It's fine.
And Finny just kind of runs around the streets of Helvetir with the other urchin children. He doesn't like stealing, but he kind of has to in order to survive. And he just does what needs to be done. He's a little sassy, little friendly little guy.
Little scamp.
And he also... will occasionally go to the Green Fairy as well to take refuge there. So
Right, and we'll get into that a bit more once we're actually interacting with both the Green Fairy and its owner, Matilda. But yeah, it is sort of a place of refuge for people who are down on their luck, and Matilda is sort of a nicer figure than you would expect for a tavern owner in a massive city that, I will say once again, just has portals to a hellscape around places. But yeah, we'll get on that a bit more with later episodes. But let's go ahead and talk just generally about, I think, some of the themes and content that you can expect from us. So as a DM, I generally get fairly descriptive and with, like, combat and things as far as more hyper violent stuff, which I think definitely is from being, a big fan of like, quote, grimdark stuff. So if gore or descriptions of gore and violence and stuff is not your thing, just a heads up. I don't think I ever do it to the point of where it's like glorification or it drags on too long, but just a general heads up. There will be a lot of discussing of death and general horror themes, because that is the idea with this campaign, is that we are looking at more horrific aspects of things, dealing with ghosts and specters and spooky things. I don't think it's gonna be like, I don't know. I have a fairly large tolerance for horror, so I'm a bad sort of judge of that. But just something to keep in mind. Once again, if it's not your thing, we're gonna have goofs and stuff too. It's not going to be all sad and scary all the time.
We're definitely going to get silly with it.
Just a heads up, there will be body horror, but at the same time, we'll probably be goofing on the body horror. So,
yes.
It's not going to be like I describe a corpse rotting for 72 hours to you or anything.
That would be a feat.
Yes, in of itself.
There will never be any sort of sexual violence or anything like that. I think that is a cheap route to horror. It will never occur. If for any reason any of that is insinuated, 1, it should never be making it to the podcast anyway. 2, I assure you that is not my intent. There is no place for it. There is no place for it in any of my stories. Realistically, there should be in no stories because it furthers nothing.
Yep.
So rest assured, that will not be a thing. But there will be gore, there will be violence, there will be horror.
Yeah,
so
and we mentioned that if there was ever an episode that had something that was like possibly, I don't know, like let's say like drug use or let's say like an extra sort of gory description, we would definitely put it in the description of the episode. Anything that is potentially
triggering, we will put it in the description as far as content warnings, because it's not fun to go into something that you're wanting to enjoy and then being hit with something that ruins your whole day, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So probably everyone here has had an experience where you're just getting excited and like, ooh, let me engage with this content. And then it's like, oh, well, I wish you would have told me. There goes my day. So I think it's very important to all of us to respect people's health. And as much as we appreciate anyone who wants to engage with our podcast, we want to make sure that it's a comfortable environment and everybody knows what to expect and what to be prepared for, I guess.
Yeah, I think that about wraps the episode. Does anyone have anything else they want to add?
Are we able to plug social media right now, or are we still trying to get that up and going?
Yeah, if you want to connect with us on the internet, you can follow us at All Necromancers on Twitter or Instagram, and you can find us on Facebook at Oops All Necromancers. We're going to have a website, we just don't have that set up yet, so stay tuned for that.
And if you want to contact me personally, Oz, you can just send a raven, whisper to a rock, and I'll get the message. So.
Don't try to find me.
Cool. Thanks for listening, everybody, and I hope that you'll stick around and check out what we got in store for you.
Please join us for episode 1.
Woo-hoo!
Yeah.
Yay.
Join us.
Join
our
us.
journey.
Join us.